All right.
Oh, I was getting nervous for a minute. Hey,
everybody.
Heidi.
Hi.
Alrighty.
Hi, Dan. Hi, Courtney. Hi,
Hey,
Mom.
good evening, everyone.
Hi, Courtney. It's Dan Morris.
So Heidi, thank you for facilitating the discussion as part of today's meeting. I think it would be, it's best that this be facilitated by the committee so
Mhm.
that everybody knows that you guys are the ones who really have, put in the lion's share of the work here and, come up with these goals and objectives, which I think it's very, very extensive, very well put together list.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm excited. Hi, Greg. And I'm excited to move into this next phase. So
Yeah.
I see we have a more attendees than panelists right now, which is good. I presume we will. I see people coming in. So yeah, thank you. Hi, Dave.
I
Christian, do you want to test out the PowerPoint real quick?
yes. Let me share my screen. Good.
Yep.
Looks good to me.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great.
So I'm assuming when this is put up on the city website, the recording will be clipped to not include this initial part of the conversation.
Oh, I think so.
Yes, we can definitely clean it up.
Okay.
So as soon as you start, that's what we'll place up.
Yeah, and it looks like it's about, my clock says 4:58. So we're just starting a little bit early, I guess, chit chatting. Looking to see who else is here. Hi, Liam. Hi, Richard. And welcome members of the public participants. And also city officials. Okay, well, my clock says 5 o'clock. So in the interest of time and welcome, I would like to officially start our meeting today. My name is Heidi Wakeman, and this is the City of Gloucester Open Space and Recreation Committee meeting held on Wednesday, April 27th at 5 p.m. 2022. In accordance with the provisions of MGL Chapter 39, Section 23A as amended, this meeting is recorded by video and audio in accordance with state open meeting law. Pursuant to Section 20 of Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, this meeting will be conducted by remote participation. Additionally, all votes taken by the Open Space and Recreation Committee during this and future remote meetings will be by roll call vote. The public may not physically attend this meeting, but every effort will be made to allow the public to view and listen to the meeting in real time. In the event that a live transmission proves unworkable for any reason, an audio or video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of the meeting will be made available on the city's website as soon as possible. So I would like to begin with a roll call of the Open Space and Recreation Committee members. And I'm start with Dave Sargent,
Here.
Dan Morris,
Present.
Richard Quaitman,
Present.
Mark Poulin,
Present.
Liam Anastasia Murphy,
Present.
Noel Mann,
Present.
and member Wakeman, Chairperson Wakeman is also present. I would also like to introduce Adrian Lennon and Greg Catamatori from the City of Gloucester, and from MAPC, Metropolitan Area Planning Council, Mark Rassicott and Christian Brandt.
I don't know what's wrong here.
You can't hear me? Oh, we can hear you, Noel, but you're muted. Noel, can you hear me? Great. And Courtney Lewis from the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. I'd also like to acknowledge Gemma Wilkins from the City of Gloucester as well. And with that, I say we have a full agenda that I'm excited to get started. And I wanted to just start by reading what the purpose of our committee is. And this is what we are here for. The mission of the Open Space and Recreation Committee. We were formulated to create and implement an open space and recreation plan for the city, which will ensure the existence, smart use, and access to open space in perpetuity. 2, ensure that contiguous areas, functions, and values that depend on them are maintained. 3, propose a process for agreements with abutters with shared use, conservation interests for enhancing open space. 4, recommend planned city growth and business development in a way that fully contemplates and strives to maintain the functions, values, uses, and vision for open space in Gloucester. 5, establish a criteria and process for seeding open space to development, and that's CEDING, open space to development or dedicated use. 6, promote awareness and use of open spaces through a descriptive inventory of open spaces. And this is important to me to share because I think as we're discussing this plan, we need to know the function of why we're here. And I think that it's really important to just get back to that. We have been meeting as a committee with the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, different people from this group, to work together, and with the City of Gloucester, with Adrian Lennon, conservation agent, and with Greg Catamatori from the planning department. So this is a project that, and then of course, with the input of the public, and that is you who are watching and participating and who have shared your thoughts and ideas and concerns. and visions for what Gloucester can be. So for me, this is an exciting opportunity. And tonight's goal is to look at what has been collected through surveys, through conversations, through prioritizing goals, and then hearing from you, members of the public, to say which of these goals can we prioritize? Because if we have 100, it may not be feasible to prioritize 100. We can't do that. What we can do is say, this is what we are hearing from you, these priorities. So there is a time tonight to speak, and that will be roughly 6 o'clock to 6:30. And then after this meeting, there will be a public comment period from May 12th to June 2nd. So that is just under a month to comment more in depth and to express ideas, concerns, support for this plan. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Adrienne Lennon.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Thank you, Chairwoman Wakeman, for getting us started. I really appreciate that. We have a full set of slides to share with you. We are going to begin the night with our consultant from MAPC, Courtney Lewis, who has been a primary point person on helping to develop the plan in collaboration with the Open Space Committee and with myself, to walk us through some of the history of the plan and planning itself and the process we've gotten to at this point. And then he'll hand it back over to me, and I will talk a little bit about how we came to establish this draft set of goals and objectives. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Courtney. Go ahead.
All right, thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Courtney Lewis. I'm a regional land use planner at the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. And as Heidi mentioned, I'm joined this evening by Mark Rassicott, who's the Director of Land Use at MAPC, and Christian Brandt, who's a planner and community engagement specialist. Before we get started, I was wondering if it's possible to post something in the chat. I'd like to share a link if that's possible. If not, then we'll figure something else out. Just want to note, as Heidi mentioned, tonight's presentation is being recorded and will be posted on the city's website so that those who were unable to join us this evening can watch later and still provide comments and feedback on the draft action plan. Next slide. So here's a look at tonight's agenda. We'll start off with a little background on the project. I'll talk about what the OSRP is and why it's important to do, which Heidi has covered a little bit of in her opening comments. I'll also share some of the phases of work of the project. I'll briefly summarize some of the OSRP survey findings. Then I'll hand things over to Adrienne Lennon, who will walk us through the goals and objectives of the 7-year action plan. Were we able to do the chat?
So Courtney, in the City of Gloucester Zoom webinar structure, we do not have a chat.
Okay, all right. Okay. We'll have a brief discussion at the end of the presentation. We'd love to hear some of your thoughts and take them into account. And then we'll close with some next steps. So as Heidi and Adrienne mentioned, since last year, MAPC has been working with the city to update its open space and recreation plan. We are the regional planning agency for the Boston metropolitan area. Our mission is to promote smart growth and regional collaboration. and we provide planning and technical assistance to 101 cities and towns in the region. Our region is broken up into 8 sub-regions, and Gloucester is within the North Shore Task Force, or the NSTF sub-region, and Christian Brandt, who I introduced earlier, serves as the sub-regional coordinator for the NSTF. Next slide. As Heidi mentioned, there are several members of this planning team. This OSRP update has been guided by the Open Space and Recreation Committee, who introduced themselves during roll call. The committee has provided input and guidance throughout the process. They've reviewed and contributed to elements of the plan and have assisted with community engagement. And as Heidi mentioned, of course, residents and community members have also provided input and feedback that has helped inform and shape the plan as well. Next slide. So now we're going to take a look at why doing this plan is so important. The state encourages each community in the Commonwealth to have an updated open space and recreation plan, or OSRP. And this is supposed to be a plan that's updated every 7 years. And the plan takes an inventory of a community's parks and open spaces. It encourages protection and stewardship of vital natural resources. And it also acts as a roadmap for the city as it invests in its parks and open space system. This OSRP update is funded with an Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs grant, city funds, and MAPC technical assistance funds. Once completed and approved by the Division of Conservation Services, Gloucester then becomes eligible for grant funding opportunities that will allow the city to acquire and improve land for conservation and recreation purposes. Gloucester's last OSRP was completed in 2010. So the city is well overdue for an update. These plans follow a standardized format and are required to address specific elements, which are outlined in the Open Space and Recreation Planners Workbook. This is an outline of the required sections for the plan. And tonight we're going to be focusing on sections 8 and 9, which lays out goals, objectives, and specific actions the city wants to try and accomplish in the next 7 years. Next slide. Mapping the city's open space and recreation resources is another major component of the OSRP. There's a set of required maps that have to be developed with the plan, and they range from soils and water resources to land use and zoning. Now we're going to take a look at some of the major phases of work and some of the feedback that we've heard throughout the process. This open space map shows that Gloucester has a good distribution of conservation and recreation areas, and these sites vary by ownership, level of protection, and use. Next slide. As an initial step to this update process, we reviewed the previous OSRP and met with city staff to tour some of Gloucester's parks and open spaces. Because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we met virtually this time last year for the first OSRP Community Forum, where we introduced the project and the planning process. We held a live Zoom presentation, followed by a virtual open house. And the purpose of the forum and open house was to help gain a better understanding of the community's values, what draws them to specific parks and open spaces, how they get to some of these sites, and what the city should prioritize as it starts to invest, as it plans for future investments in its park and open space system. A recording of the meeting and a copy of that presentation was posted on the city website so that people who weren't able to join the live session were able to view content and provide feedback at the virtual open house. We gathered approximately 192 responses from the online open house, and we got 128 respondents answered all questions. So some of the survey questions were optional, like the demographic questions. So not everyone filled out those particular questions. Next slide. So we asked open house respondents to rate the importance of a number of park and open space priorities. And based on the feedback that we received, the top 5 priorities were acquiring land for conservation purposes, maintaining existing parks and facilities, acquiring land for protection of areas that would be impacted by climate change. So areas that would be exposed to storm surge and sea level rise. Improving access to parks and facilities through trails, sidewalks, bike lanes, and safer crossings. And also acquiring land for parks and facilities in areas that lack parks. Next slide. So in addition to the forum and the open house, we launched an online community survey to assess community-wide needs and preferences as they relate to parks and open spaces, as well as recreation programming. Much of the feedback was used to help shape the objectives and action items for the 7-year action plan. And for the survey, we ended up getting 826 responses and approximately 579 respondents answered all survey questions. And again, some questions were optional. Next slide. The survey was organized into 10 different topic areas. So we asked questions about what parks and open spaces people use, the quality of their experiences when visiting these spaces, how frequently they visited specific sites, what types of activities they enjoy doing while in these spaces. We also asked what types of facilities, amenities, and programming people wanted to see more of in the future. Next slide. As it pertains to natural and more natural and conservation areas throughout Gloucester, 93% of respondents were satisfied or very satisfied with the quality of the city's conservation areas. Next slide. 84% of respondents were satisfied or very satisfied with the quality of the city's beaches. 83% of respondents were satisfied or very satisfied with the quality of the city's playing fields, athletic courts, and recreation areas. Next slide. 85% of respondents were satisfied or very satisfied with the quality of the city's playgrounds. And looking at the city's overall park and open space system, 85% of survey respondents were satisfied or very satisfied with the quality of the city's parks and open space. We also asked about recreational programming, and the top 3 program survey respondents said they would like to see more of in the next 7 years were boating activities. So things like sailing, kayaking, paddleboarding, gardening programs, and more aquatic programs. So things like swim lessons, swim teams, and lifeguard training. We also asked about park amenities and features. And the top 5 amenities or site features that participants wanted to see in parks and facilities over the next 7 years were more natural landscapes and conservation areas, trails for walking, running, and hiking, more bathroom facilities, improved natural and conservation areas, and having more access points to more water access points for activities like rowing and kayaking. Next slide. We also wanted to engage groups of people that might otherwise be underrepresented in community input. So we partnered. So as part of our outreach efforts, we partnered with the Gloucester Racial Justice Team, which is a community organization that focuses on creating safer and more welcoming environments in the city, as well as Wellspring House, which is a Gloucester-based social services nonprofit that provides language educational classes for residents who speak languages other than English. And we hosted 2 focus groups, one with Spanish speakers and one with residents who were Portuguese speakers. And we facilitated a guided discussion about parks and open spaces that participants use more frequently. We discuss issues or important issues that they may encounter when visiting or using parks. And participants also offered suggestions on how the city could improve its parks, recreation spaces, and programming. Those discussions included several positive comments, but there were a few negative comments as well. Participants mentioned that they enjoyed visiting sites like Stage Fort Park and Fisherman Memorial and the Fisherman's Memorial along Stacy Boulevard. But they also expressed concerns about drug use in some parks and the need for additional cultural programming for youth in the city. Next slide. The draft 7-year action plan was developed by first reviewing the action plan from the 2010 OSRP, and all completed actions were removed from the list, and the remaining items were reviewed by the Open Space and Recreation Committee to determine whether they were still applicable. New actions were added based on city priorities, input from the community forums, and feedback from the survey and focus groups. Next slide. The city has undertaken a number of projects since the adoption of the 2010 plan. This is a summary of significant open space recreation accomplishments, a majority of which include projects that were fully or partially funded with Community Preservation Act funds. Next slide. And so the 7-year action plan is arranged sequentially, beginning with the first goal and associated objectives and actions to facilitate the achievement of that goal. And overall, there are 5 goals, 27 objectives, and 74 action items in the draft plan. Adrian is going to walk us through the goals and objectives. And since there are such a large number of action items, we'll be launching a survey next week where we will ask you all to prioritize and provide feedback on the plan objectives and their associated action items. So with that, I'm going to hand things over to Adrian, and she's going to walk us through the action plan.
Thank you, Courtney. Okay, so before I start walking through goals and objectives, I want to just inform everybody that there are 13 panelists on the call. That includes myself, Planning Director Greg Hadamatori, Staff Planner Gemma Wilkins from the City of Gloucester, and then, as we've mentioned before, our 3 partners at MAPC, Christian Brandt, Courtney Lewis, and Mark Rassicott. And then in addition to that, we have all of our Open Space and Recreation Committee members. We have 28 attendees on the call. So I'm going to try pretty quickly to go through this set of goals. The objective at the end of this, when we are able to have our initial feedback discussion here, is that any attendee who may want to speak will have at least a minute of the floor to promote and encourage others to promote and prioritize the objectives that that really ring true for them. So I will try to be quick. I know I have about 30 minutes for all 28 of our attendees if they do decide to speak, but there's a lot to go through. So go ahead, Christian, let's go on to the first. This is an overview slide talking about OSRP goals. The real directive of an open space plan is defined by the goals, objectives, and action items, which is essentially a very large outline to consider what the city can be doing in open space and recreation over the course of the lifespan of the plan. In the past, the plan has selected certain priorities based on the membership of the Open Space and Recreation Committee, or maybe the interests of the city staff that were there, and something that this Open Space and Recreation Committee and I were really dedicated to trying to incorporate was the entire scope of what we could think of for the needs and wants of the city of Gloucester in this field of public land use and management. And that also includes our waterways and access to the water. So having said that, we had about 7 meetings to go through OSRP goals. We came up initially with this high level of goal expressions, and then had some marathon meetings, some of them 3-4 hours long, walking through all of the objectives and action items that we could come up with and that were related to the survey respondents, and made sure we incorporated all the feedback we got from the survey. We also had public comment periods at all these meetings to talk about it, and took public comment and incorporated the comments of some of the attendees watching the call into the goals process. So thank you to everybody who is probably still attending tonight, who was part of the process with us in the late fall and winter to really step through all of this. You will see yourself here. With that said, I will begin here. Goal number 1 is to develop and direct a program of strategic preservation of open space and recreation lands using the inventory for this plan. One of the big priorities of the plan update was to make sure that we had a good, high-functioning, accurate working inventory of the city of Gloucester and of privately held and other publicly held lands that are either in conservation or have some limited protection through Article 97 or Chapter 61A, which is agricultural restrictions, or otherwise. And with the support of staff planner Gemma Wilkins, we went through a very lengthy exercise of going parcel by parcel through every single city map, myself and planning director Greg Hadamatori, to reconcile anything that we considered that could potentially fall on this inventory. So one of the outcomes of this plan begins with a very high functioning inventory tool that intends to be updated regularly. Goal number 2 is to improve management and stewardship of Gloucester's open space, including conservation lands, trails, forests, and vista points. Coming from the survey, we learned a lot about the public's feelings about the city's management and activities towards stewardship of our lands and trails and our park lands and our beaches. And so we wanted to make a point of setting aside specific goals to incorporate all of those. So in this way, we decided that we would separate the discussion of open space and recreation to open space, which is what we considered trails and forests and naturalized areas, and parks and beaches and other public facilities. So you'll see goal number 2 calls for management and stewardship of Gloucester's open space. And goal number 3 calls for the maintaining, enhancing, and expanding Gloucester's recreation lands, which includes parks, playgrounds, athletic facilities, beaches, and public landings. And we really felt like that was a good way to make the scope of requests and interests digestible and organized, and easier to prioritize going forward into the plan's actionable years. So goal number 4 is to protect and improve gateways and create strategic connections between open space and recreation areas. In this goal, we were talking a lot about multimodal forms of transport and how we can try to connect certain open spaces, even things like pocket parks downtown, access points to the water, and also trail systems in West Gloucester, so that we are able to perhaps mountain bike from one open space area to another according to a mapped and organized and marked trail system. Goal number 5 is to plan for and incorporate the concerns of climate change and resiliency in all policies and operations programs related to the open space and recreation areas. And this is a big one. From the very beginning, the Open Space and Recreation Committee was clearly communicating that they wanted to see a strong focus on climate change initiatives and resiliency efforts in every fiber of the discussion of open space and recreation, because it was very important for the committee to be centering that issue in the cycle of this plan. So goal number 5 is new to the open space and recreation plan. It did not exist in the 2011 plan. It is new to the update, and we set it aside separately because this is a discussion of policy and programming, and it is not a discussion of capital improvements to our facilities or a discussion of, for example, opportunities for stewardship or nonprofit groups to participate with the city in improving our public lands and recreation areas. This is really specific to the city and the community working hard to come up with new and innovative ways to respond to the impacts of climate change on the city of Gloucester, which I think we talk a lot about in a lot of different forums. So I'm excited to see that there. You can go to the next one, Christian. So beginning with the first, as you'll see, it becomes really extensive. At the top, we have the goal to develop and direct a program of strategic preservation of open space and recreation lands using the inventory produced for this plan. And we've divided them into the 4 objectives, and each which have, in some case, action items attached to them. So objective 1A is to focus land conservation efforts in areas identified as containing valuable natural resources, including priority wildlife habitat, watershed lands that supply Gloucester's drinking water, areas with large contiguous blocks of undeveloped open space, and critical areas of environmental and climate resiliency concern. Objective B is to continue to refine and improve the open space inventory by identifying and reconciling the following parcel types: parcels of unknown ownership identity, parcels in city ownership with conservation restrictions, parcels in city ownership to place into conservation restrictions, merge parcels for survey purposes, parcels defined as land of low value, this is considered marshlands, and parcels in private ownership. Objective 1C is to monitor the open space and recreation plan land inventory and improve analysis tools that treat the database as a living record of the current status of available and conserved land in Gloucester. Objective 1D is to promote and support the acquisition of permanent protection via conservation restriction of the following parcel types: land for conservation purposes, for example, wildlife habitat and water supply protection, land for parks and facilities in areas that lack parkland, land and easement right-of-way access to the Commonwealth tidelands, these are public landings, and lands for protection of areas from flooding, storm surge, and sea level rise. So even in the first goal, you can see there was a really robust discussion about all of the possibilities that we could think about in terms of strategic preservation in open space. And so as you're watching this, and if you're seeing it for the first time, the goal here is that if something really stands out to you, a certain objective and action item as part of an objective, that you're going to respond to us and tell us, like, this is really where you want to see the Open Space and Recreation Committee make their priorities. Go ahead, Christian. Goal number 2 is to improve management and stewardship of Gloucester's open space, including conservation lands, trails, forests, and vista points. And again, as I mentioned, we divided the discussion of open space and recreation land into 2. One is this more passive look at naturalized areas. So objective 2A is to increase operational and capital budgets for more personnel to focus on the city's open space system, to implement an annual reporting and reconciliation mechanism to the city's annual budget cycle to outline short-term and long-term maintenance needs. Objective 2B is to develop and implement land management plans for priority parcel clusters to guide protection and management of Gloucester's open space. Objective 2C is to promote responsible and careful use of open space by expanding awareness of stewardship needs through public outreach and education. And objective 2D is to develop partnerships with local organizations and institutions to support the city's management needs. Go ahead, Christian. Okay. Goal number 3 is to maintain, enhance, and expand Gloucester's recreation lands, including parks, playgrounds, athletic facilities, beaches, and public landings. Objective 3A is to establish a Parks and Recreation Division within the Department of Community Development to support the organization and development of associated programming. Objective 3B is to conduct a 10-year Park and Recreation Capital Improvement Plan for all Gloucester athletic fields, courts, and playgrounds to determine facilities maintenance and programming management needs. Objective 3C is to develop a beach maintenance and management plan to assess capital improvement needs and routine maintenance protocols to enhance and protect all Gloucester beaches. Objective 3D is to evaluate and improve existing Gloucester public landings to serve and promote boating, recreational aquatics, and fishing. And Objective 3E is to manage programming and supervision of recreation lands through the city website using new and existing service portals while prioritizing Gloucester residents' access. And I want to just put a note in here talking about Gloucester residents' access and the promotion and use of our open space and recreation lands by Gloucester citizens. Part of the discussion over the course of this past year and a half or so has had a lot to do with tourism and the impact on tourism, especially during the COVID pandemic, of people traveling to visit Gloucester open space and recreation areas, and the amount of pressure that actually put on some of those areas, and how that has changed some of the use types and management of those spaces. And there's been a lot of concern from the citizens of Gloucester about that. I think that in some cases people felt displaced. And so in the plan and the goals, we're really talking about how we can better organize use in a way that honors the Gloucester residents' access and interests first, while also recognizing that it is a very beautiful and popular place to visit, and wants to be a welcoming place for others to come to, as long as they're able to use and enjoy open space and recreation areas in a respectful and meaningful way for the city. So go ahead, Christian. Goal number 4 is to protect and improve gateways and to create strategic connections between open space and recreation areas. Objective 4A, promote cycling, walking, and other forms of self-propelled travel throughout the city by improving multimodal communications and wayfinding to provide safe travel. Objective 4B is to improve parking by identifying and enumerating suitable parking at entrances to popular open space and recreation areas. Objective 4C is to improve ADA accessibility at all Gloucester open space and recreation areas to the extent feasible. And Objective 4D is to identify green linkages in the city center and school zones. Kristen, you can go ahead to the next. Thank you. And goal 5, again, is our new goal to this plan, and it is a great discussion of all the opportunities still to be undertaken by the city in an effort to address climate change and resiliency. So plan for and incorporate the concerns of climate change and resiliency in all policies and operation programs related to open space and recreation areas. Objective 5A, advocate for and increase operational and capital budgets for personnel to focus on the city's climate change vulnerability concerns. Implement an annual reporting and reconciliation mechanism into the city's annual budget cycle to outline short-term and long-term opportunities to become more resilient as a municipality. Objective 5B, advocate for the development and implementation of emergency management communication plans for city departments to use during natural disaster events. Objective 5C, advocate for the development and implementation of a forestry management plan to minimize the risk of forest fire in the city forests. Objective 4D, advocate for the development and implementation of the recommendations set forth in the city's updated municipal harbor plan to redevelop a sustainable Gloucester harbor. Objective 5E, advocate for the investment in resilient design projects to protect the wastewater treatment facility from the effects of flooding, storm surge, and sea level rise. And you can advance, Christian. Objective 5F, advocate for the development and implementation of a wildlife and vegetation management program for watershed lands and water department facilities. Objective 5G, advocate for an update to the existing surface water protection plan to increase water storage capacity in all existing city reservoirs. Objective 5H, advocate for an update to the existing watershed management plan to include an expansion of the watershed protection overlay district. Objective 5I, advocate for an update to the existing floodplain ordinance to identify areas of current and projected flood risk according to the FEMA geospatial database reports. Objective 5J, advocate for an update to the existing wetlands ordinance to increase protections for wetlands, natural resource areas, and buffer zones. So before we go on to that, I want to point out that on goal 5, I went to multiple different departments and interviewed management staff at the DPW, in the engineering department, in the harbor master's office, in the health department, and in the planning department, among a couple of others, to ask them about what their top priorities were in the world of climate change, resiliency, and sustainability planning, what their highest concerns were. And then I took that back to the Open Space and Recreation Committee to evaluate and think about where they may have opportunities to function as an advocacy group to try to see some of these policies move forward. And I think it's a really elegant way for the Open Space and Recreation Committee to find themselves in the discussion around climate change and resiliency policy, which would obviously take place in other settings, for example, likely before City Council and the Planning Board, among others. But it encourages a participation, and by way of extending the open space planning process to the public, we are introducing the subject matter for participation before it has really even begun to take shape. So please consider that when you're thinking about what you would advocate for as a priority in your responses tonight during the discussion, and also in the survey after the fact. And with that, I will turn this over to Heidi again to lead our discussion. We have 33 attendees on the call, and hopefully just enough time to cover everyone.
Yeah, I'll just say something really quick before Heidi gets started. I just want to say thank you to the committee and to Adrian for all the hard work in putting together the action plan. We now would like to welcome you to use the raise hand function to share some of your thoughts on the goals and objectives of the action plan. In order to maximize the number of people that are able to share and comment on this evening, we ask that each individual limit their comments to about a minute, just so that we can hear from everyone. And now I'll hand things over to Heidi.
Thank you, Adrian. Thank you, Courtney. And thank you, members who are here with us tonight. I am very proud to look at the work that we've done to see it all together here, but I don't want to take any more time. I would really like to hear from people. So in the spirit of sharing and listening, I will call people in the order that I see their hands raised. And if you wouldn't, this is a public meeting, so is it appropriate to ask for an address? Is that okay? Or is that not? I'm kind of asking, I don't know. Is that necessary?
So in these circumstances, because it is a posted public meeting where we'll be reporting minutes to this, when you go to speak, you'll have to state your name and address for the record.
Okay, thank you, Adrian. Okay, Robert Myers, your hand's been raised, and you're all set.
Hi, I have two questions. One is,
do you mind identifying just your address or your residence?
I'm very sorry.
No, no worries.
Robert Myers, 716 Washington Street, Gloucester.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm two things I'm interested in. One is, have there been pathways identified for wildlife to get from the mainland to the island with the minimum crossing of public roads and other danger spots for wildlife? The second question I have for you is, is it not considered part of the purview of this to think about the ocean bottom of the waters that are all around us to whatever limit is looked at and cared about by organizations like MAPC? I don't know that there's anything specific, but it seems like with the Gulf of Maine warming up more than almost nearly 100% of the world's oceans, is there anything in the study here that looks at how we can also mitigate that to some degree, if at all? Thank you.
Thank you, Robert.
I will just say that there is a section of the plan that talks about wildlife corridors. There was not an extensive study done about wildlife corridors through Gloucester. To me, that would require a more intensive study and is slightly outside of what this plan is positioned to do. And the second question you spoke about with the ocean bottoms, we do again look at the city's water resources, but in terms of again that I feel like that the situation you described would require more in-depth and detailed study that's beyond the scope of work for this particular plan.
Thank you, Courtney. LJ, is that Lisa?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Thank you so much. This is a great presentation, and I've listened into a couple of your meetings, and this is a great undertaking. One thing that came up to me, and I did take your online community survey.
I'm sorry, ma'am, but before you begin, could you state your name and address for the record?
It's Lisa Rigsby. I live at 3 Taylor Court in Gloucester.
Thank you.
And a great user of all of our trails, everything, nature, sea, and forest. One thing that came up to me in looking at, and I did read also the last Rockport OSRC report, is that there's a lack of mention of hunting as a passive recreational activity. It came up to me, and especially because it came up as tourism and COVID, and I was walking in Dogtown and noticing the influx of people coming from out of town, and came upon a deer baiting station in Dogtown, and it concerned me greatly. And I see a lack of addressing hunting in the reports that I see. And I was wondering if I overlooked something. Is it something that you don't address? But it is very concerning to me, especially with the use of our trail system. I see families geocaching and like coming up to a baiting station could be, really alarming. And yeah, just wanted to get some feedback on that, your thoughts on it and how you've addressed it or not. Thank you.
I'll take that one. If you encounter a situation where somebody is baiting deer, the next phone call is to the Massachusetts Environmental Police. That is not inside of the scope of this planning exercise, although there are hunting regulations inside of the city of Gloucester. Hunting over bait is illegal in the Commonwealth.
Thank you, Adrian, and thank you, Lisa. I see Elizabeth next on my list. And if you would just identify your first and last name and address or residence. Thank you. Oh, Elizabeth, talking's permitted. You can unmute. Elizabeth, can you hear us? And it's your turn. And if you're not available, we'll move on and come
Yes,
back.
hi,
Oh,
Heidi.
oh, great,
Heidi,
great.
I'm sorry, you know what
No.
I didn't realize? This is Sandy Barry,
Oh,
93
great.
Wheeler Street, and I must be using somebody else's account that logged in.
Okay.
Great, thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate all this work. I have a question about objective 1B, which has to do with parcels of unknown ownership and identity. I think that we've gone through that exercise so many times, and I'm mostly concerned about Dogtown parcels. And my concern is actually the city kind of eking and creeping into Dogtown and using them for other purposes. And I'd like to know what your input is on that. Thank you.
Sure, I can respond to that. So not knowing specifically what parcels that you are talking about, the intent of the discussion for the Open Space Committee when we were talking about the inventory and parcels of unknown origin is that there are in fact parcels all around the city that are identified as no owner and no history, that have a shape to them, and they certainly do exist at the Registry of Deeds and they exist in our GIS database, but we don't have any information on them. And so when we're looking at the inventory tool, there is a certain margin of error that's associated with unknown parcels. It's also true that some of them are the woodlot parcels up in Dogtown. So for us, it's really about trying to prioritize which parcels to try to seek a history of identification on, and or if we are unable to move through the process before Superior Court to try to incorporate them into the City of Gloucester's portfolio of parcels. If you have some other experience with some other departments in the City of Gloucester or the city itself, or some user groups or something like that, that you feel is an encroachment, please do inform us. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sandy. Next up, I see Marianne Boucher. Welcome, Marianne.
Thank you, Marianne Albert Boucher, 93 Mount Pleasant Avenue. Thank you for all of your hard work. You know, I've been here many times. I've heard the word stewardship, plan, protect, enhance, improve, maintain. I've been a serious advocate for the East Gloucester playground, which is the Lieutenant Arthur Maxwell Parsons Playground in East Gloucester, which is behind the East Gloucester Elementary School, which has been encroached on by taking for parking spaces for the school. Modulars have been placed on his playground. And now the City of Gloucester has taken part of a deed restricted property to make up for the no net loss of Meadows Field. It is slated, the East Gloucester School is slated to be demolished after next year. And we've been told, and I know Greg Kadamatori can probably speak on this, that it is supposed to be turned into a parkland or playground of some sort. I would like to know what the plan is for that. I would like to know if a committee is going to be formed for that. I would like to know if it is going to be protected, because from what I've seen, Lieutenant Arthur Maxwell Parsons Playground has not been protected. You are the steward for these parks and playgrounds, and I've watched Meadows Field disappear, and now I've watched part of Maxwell Parsons Playground that is deeded and restricted. A portion has been taken away, and I don't know where anyone was to stand up and protect that. So I really would like some information. I'd love to be on a committee for that piece of land. It's very important to me and very important to the people in my neighborhood. So thank you so much.
I'll just briefly respond. Greg Kadamatori, Planning Director. Thank you for that comment. I'm not aware of that specific history that you're referring to. I know just anecdotally, I haven't been heavily involved with the operations of the school district. And I know that there, over time, there were different improvements that were made in that area. If they did encroach, I'm not aware of that, but thank you for bringing that to my attention. There isn't a specific design at this point for how the school site will be converted to open space. I think their initial thought was passive open space, certainly maintaining the playground and maybe providing some some parking for the playground itself. So there is no specific plan for a committee per se yet, but I will certainly bring that back to the administration because that is something that's on the horizon that needs to be planned for. And I certainly think it makes sense to have citizen involvement in the outcome.
Thank you. But and I just say, Greg, please refer to the September 23rd, 2019 video of a public hearing, building committee, because Jonathan Pope, the chairperson, states how that playground was encroached on with the parking and with the modulars. I encourage you to do so. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I'll just add that as a follow-up to that is one of the survey questions that will be posed following this forum will ask if you're interested in volunteering, if you're interested in being a volunteer. And so we'll ask for contact information so that the city can start to compile a list of volunteers so that when issues like this come up or there are certain projects throughout the city that require the work of volunteers, they'll have a direct contact list of people to reach out to.
Thank you. I've been advocating for that for 62 years. So, and I pretty much am the person who cleans it every day. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Marianne, and also thank you for attending so many of our open space meetings. I want to direct you when you have the opportunity to respond to objective 3B, I believe, under action items, specifically identifies Lieutenant Arthur Maxwell Parsons Playground. So I want to encourage you to advocate there too in the data set.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Greg, and thank you, Adrian and Courtney. Christopher Lewis, I recognize to speak.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. I'm Christopher Lewis, 35 Eastern Point Road in Gloucester. And I used to be chairman of the Open Space Committee in Rockport. I wrote the 2010 report. And as you probably know, Rockport has been very concerned with rights of way and prescriptive easements. And I'm very concerned because I'm noticing that new owners in and around my area are becoming much more aggressive about stopping the public going on Niles Beach and Brace Cove. And I believe there are prescriptive easements in both those places. And I'm wondering if you've dealt with rights of way and prescriptive easements in this report.
Yes, absolutely. So it's away. Hold on, I gotta find it. Okay, in goal number 3, public landings are addressed. Objective 3D, evaluate and improve existing Gloucester public landings to serve and promote boating, recreational aquatics, and fishing. And in the action items of objective 3D, we discuss the need for an inventory of existing public landings and easement opportunities, and the ask for the Harbor Master's Office also to focus on doing a regular annual maintenance report and request of new upgrades and changes in signage to clarify the public's access to those landings through Chapter 91 Tidelands.
Yes, but that doesn't, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so but that deals with landings, which actually in Rocky Neck is there. It's very there's one landing that's very clear at Onsen Cove. However, the access to that is very poor. The other one is dubious. The public doesn't know It's on, as you go up the hill where that monster house is, there's a landing there, and it's not clear whether the public can use that. It gives the impression that only Rocky Neck residents can use that. So that needs clarification. Maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong, but we have no way of knowing that. The other, but that begs the question of rights of way. For example, an issue that I'm really is unclear. When you go on to Niles Beach, the public access, I have been told by people that the city leases a private section adjacent to the public section from the guy who lives on the corner of Farrington and Eastern Point Boulevard. I don't know whether that's true. I don't know. It's untrue. It's unclear. But this needs to be cleared up because people are walking on that part. Now, I claim, and I think there's a prescriptive easement along the private part of Niles Beach. So I'm not talking landings, I'm talking beach. So from one end, from where the public beach is, across the leased beach, if it is leased, to the private beach, all the way to 55 Eastern Point Boulevard, I believe there exists a prescriptive easement for people, the general public, to use that because they've used it for 100 or more years. And that's what a prescriptive easement is all about. Okay, the same thing applies to the pathway along Brace Cove, which goes from the Eastern Point Retreat to the road adjoining St. Louis, the house at 8 Brace Cove. There's the paper road, and there's the beach. Again, people have been walking those things for 100 years, and once you've done that, the public has done it unchallenged. The law says in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts that there exists a prescriptive easements and people can't stop you. But some of these new owners are trying to stop people, just as they did in Rockport 30 years ago. They formed a rights of way committee, and they succeeded in all but one case in maintaining the rights of way. This is a very important issue. What you're telling me is that it hasn't been addressed in this report, and I think that's a big gap. I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comment.
Yeah, thank you for your service on a fellow committee. And if and when there's an opening, maybe you'll consider joining our committee. Next up is Denise Pascucci.
Hello.
Hello, we can hear you.
Yep.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Hi, Denise Pascucci, 20 Birch Grove Heights, and I'm sorry about my dog. I'm spinning ideas here about all this open space, which I think is wonderful. You probably all know that I've been advocating for open space as far as Mados Field and on a lot of the fields that we've been losing. The city has had many ball fields that have been taken away and not replaced, especially the one in East Gloucester too, behind the field, behind the school. The question I have is, does anybody know, or can you find out why the city of Gloucester does not have a Parks and Recreation Department? I remember back in the 80s and 90s, we had Paul Landry, and he did such a great job with, the permits for the fields, the obviously the parks and obviously the beaches. And I recently asked Mayor Verga about a Parks and Recreation, and he just basically stated that there wasn't going to be one. So I don't know if any of you know why we got rid of it, first of all, and can we get it back? Because I think it's a very big asset to our city that we have somebody that's really taking care of these parks and the beaches. And I think the DPW, has the service of it now, but I think they're overwhelmed and they don't really get to everything that needs to be done. And one of the things that I thought was a really bad problem is when we had a bathroom down at Mados Field, it was never maintained. And also there is a bathroom at Burnham's Field that is hardly ever used or maintained. So that's my question is, do you know why we don't have a Parks and Recreation? And do you know if we can get it back? Thank you.
So I can't necessarily speak to the history of why that's missing, but it is something that has come up throughout this process. And We start to address that under goal 3, objective 3A, with the objective of establishing a Parks and Recreation division. And I don't know if anyone else from the committee or city staff would like to add to that, but that's noted, and it's something that's definitely been brought to the attention of the committee.
Is it possible to get information back to me on that?
So I'm not sure exactly what the question is that you're asking, but I will tell you, Denise, we were happy and delighted to include that as an objective among our goals for the maintain, enhance, and expand Gloucester's recreation lands, including parks, playgrounds, athletic facilities, beaches, and public landings. My understanding is that sometime in the middle 90s or at the turn of the millennium, there was a very tight series of budget years, and the Parks and Recreation division was absorbed largely into the DPW. Those positions were merged together with the DPW, which is why the management of parks now largely falls within the scope and purview of the DPW, and in some cases they're athletic and boosters partners, and also with the schools. So we are all very much in support of the idea of a dedicated Parks and Recreation department. Another thing that you haven't mentioned here, but that also came up a great deal in the process is a call for recreational opportunities and programming. So historically, the city of Gloucester had a boating program and some other youth recreation programs, and none of those things exist now in the city of Gloucester. There is no Gloucester Youth Recreation. There is no Gloucester Maritime Recreation Program. There are no adult programs. And so there's definitely an opportunity for the city to better organize the use of our open space and recreation lands around the umbrella of a city department. It's a matter of having the will. And so it's absolutely incorporated into the plan here. And I strongly encourage you to advocate for it.
I will definitely advocate for it. And I definitely would like to be on a committee too to help with the open space as well in the future. Pretty soon I'll be retiring, and I'd like to put a little more of my effort into that, because I do believe that we need more ball fields in town. I've seen it for years. I played on Meadows Field for over 40 years. I've seen fields being taken away from, the little girls, the boys, and we have a very lively and full athletic committees all over the place. I mean, it's crazy, and we have a beautiful city. So I find it very important that Parks and Recreation should be looked into. So I do appreciate it.
Great, thank you. And for reference for everybody here, all of the 31 attendees on the call, you don't have to be an appointed member of the Open Space and Recreation Committee to attend our meetings. You can always attend as an attendee, and certainly reach out to the chairwoman if there's something that comes up that you want to try to connect more on. We welcome your participation and continued attendance.
Thank you, Denise, and thank you, Adrian. Next up is Patty Amaral.
Hello, my name is Patty Amaral, 14 Myrtle Square. I served on this committee for many, many years. Faces are familiar. I will echo what Denise said about Meadows. Right now, everyone's scrambling to find ball fields because we took 3 ball fields and we're putting them down to 1. So that's very important. Everyone's scrambling. I'm not playing this year. I retired mostly because of Meadows. So heartbreaking. But anyway, my thought is about the Emerald Forest. It's a wetland in my inner city. I clean it. It's overwhelming. It's not protected. I've reached out to the city several times about this. Jamie O'Hara, our ward counselor, and nothing happens. It's illegally being filled on the Maplewood Ave end. And no matter how many people I talk to, no one does anything about it. So I think that, wetlands are very important. The Emerald Forest and Burnham's Field are the only 2 open spaces in our inner city. And as we know, we lost Meadows Field for that densely populated neighborhood, so they have nothing either now. We need to protect these places because otherwise they're gone. So I'm hoping that they're going to be able to be protected in this open space plan. I'm also wondering about the maintenance of our parks. I've been on the city council meetings several times, open oral communications, and talked about Burnham's Field, how unsafe it is. I have a granddaughter now. I will not go down Burnham's. Now I'm going to Oval because Burnham's is so unsafe, and our school children are using it every single day. I just don't understand that it's in that condition, and there's just something we have to do. Money has to be put towards the maintenance of these areas that our children are playing on. The Fort playground, the metal area, you'll rip a kneecap off. I'm surprised no one's gotten hurt yet. Or maybe they just got hurt and they didn't come and say anything to anybody. But we need to put some money into these playgrounds and everything. You can build all you want, but if we're not maintaining them and making them safe for our children, it's no good. So I thank you for your time. I don't know how many years I sat in the seat that you're sitting in now, but we can't just have the words up there. We have to really make the actions, because I saw some of these things that we had in the same open space plan that when I was sitting there too. Now, I appreciate your work, you're working hard, but maybe we need to push the city more to do things like that. The Park and Recreation Committee needs to happen. And I'm not sure how much money that is to pay for that, but it definitely needs to happen before someone really gets hurt. So thank you very much and have a great day.
Thank you, Patty.
Thank you, Patty, and thank you for your service. That's where I met you, and yeah, some of us are still on here. So, and I think I just want to echo this sentiment of how affirming it is for me and for the committee members to hear members that are here echoing what our priorities are, and to know that we have this common ground. And the next step is on we go. The next step is to present it to more people in the public and to maybe exert some pressure and see what we can create. So to dream big and to imagine what it can be is really important. So thank you.
Can you still hear me?
Yes.
So what do we do about the protection part of it? I mean, I just feel like, again, I'm just like being, okay. It has to happen. Please, take a walk around my neighborhood. We're talking about doing this TOD, transit-oriented development, in our neighborhood, building 60-foot buildings. I mean, and we can't even keep what we have. I mean, so who do I talk to about protecting the Emerald Forest now, yesterday, today? Can somebody go, Adrian, you go and take a ride by there and say, yes, this is illegal. Why is this happening? It was one car parking, and now it's 4 big giant trucks and a trailer thing. That's obviously the person filled it in. How do we do this now?
So, I mean, I think I can speak briefly on this, but when you're talking about trying to protect it, that parcel, as I understand it, is privately held. And so because it is privately held, the city doesn't have the capacity to, for example, issue any kind of limited or conservation deed restriction on the property. However, obviously, the regulatory standards of the Wetlands Protection Act and the Gloucester Wetlands Ordinance are always in play in resource areas, regardless of their location. And certainly is a conversation to be had. My understanding is that the property will come before the Conservation Commission before any type of development takes place, because even the upland area where those parking lots are located are in the buffer zone.
And I have peepers. I just went out there last night, and so I have that recorded, and I go out there every year to record it because I am scared to death that the bulldozers will come any day now and take this such an important thing. And as I saw from what just happened to Meadows in the last 3 years, that breaks my heart. I didn't even think for a minute that would happen to Meadows after all that work. I didn't think for a minute. And here we are, and it happened. And thank goodness that we're going to be looking at this in our appeal hearing in May. And I hope we win so we take back that open space. Thank you.
Thank you, Patty. Next up is Robert Sherman. Welcome.
Good evening. My name is Robert Sherman. I live at 13 Chester Square in Gloucester. Just, you know, I am a current member of the Conservation Commission, and I did see in some of the objectives that one of the objectives is the updating of the wetland ordinance for the city of Gloucester, and I have to agree that that is necessary. But my primary comment is something I saw. I guess I have a little objection with the phrase of land of low value. And again, I thought of this when it said marshlands in parentheses, and I wasn't sure if this was referring to saltwater marshes or freshwater marshes, but personally, I don't consider them land of low value. They may be a land of low value at some times of the year during recreational use, but it makes me think of, you know, it's particularly saltwater marshes are just invaluable resources, and you know, ecologically. And I hear that there may be a proposal in installing greenhead horsefly traps in some of the marshes here in Gloucester. And I guess my concern there is, though no one loves getting bitten by greenheads, they can be, you know, very painful little bites, but they do play an important role in the ecology of saltwater marshes. And so I wish that people would consider this when they consider in reducing the numbers of the greenheads during that, you know, that season when they're in their adult phase, that they may be very annoying and painful, that they do play a vital role in the ecology of our saltwater marshes. And so people will consider that when they want to install these greenhead traps. That's my comment.
Thanks,
Thank
Bob. I'll
you.
respond to that. So for your reference, of course, I do not think that marshlands are low value. But the reason that we use that description to define them is that it is the Department of Revenue's description for marshlands, properties that are parcels that do exist and have a historic function for salt marsh hanging agricultural use, but now are no longer in use and are not considered to be generating any value or of any value for ownership. And the reason that we set them aside, specifically that DOR designation land of low value, is because we want to prioritize the conservation of marshlands. And so we can very clearly identify which ones they are by filtering for that particular DOR code, land of low value.
Okay, but it just, I mean, in a public forum, it seems like it kind of gives them a negative connotation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. I see Patty Page has her hand raised. Welcome, Patty.
Thank you, Heidi. Patty Page, 3 Tidal Cove Way. I apologize up front. I got a disruption here, so I did miss a piece of this meeting. But my interest is always Section 3D, the waterways. I'd like to just emphasize that in my memory, the survey that was taken by the public, boating came up at over 50% interest, and boating, sailing, rowing goes further than just landings. I'd like to really see how this gets prioritized, where it was the top recreational interest of the public here. This is a 7-year plan. And if we don't prioritize that, I know mostly terrestrial goals and objectives are focused on, but we are an oceanfront community, waterfront community, and I'm pleased to know that Adrian, who has a lot of knowledge here, always, was aware of the city sailing program that is no longer. The infrastructure for all this is very easily recreated and exists, and it will not take much to start a youth boating program or an adult boating program here. I've done it once. It's a very doable thing. And I just really stress that you might make this one of your top priorities during the outlay of this plan. I'd also like to speak to, I'm glad that Mr. Sherman spoke about the new pesticide boxes coming to our marshes. Environmental quality, especially aquatic environmental quality with shellfish beds and alewives and everything up and down the river. This is critical. There are pesticides in these boxes. They're not magic black boxes. They just attract flies. They're termed attractants. They're termed mushroom breath. There's all kinds of lesser terms, but octanol is a classified pesticide. I understand this may come in front of the Conservation Commission under a request for determination of applicability. I'm hoping that does happen. I want to make you aware that the mayor has signed a 3-year agreement that was in the city council package Tuesday night. I have a lot of concerns about all this, and I do believe there will be a public hearing at the council level. I bring this up in open space because environmental qualities should rank somewhere. The safety of beachgoers, the safety of just the quality of our environment is very important. And 60 boxes along our marshlands is not insignificant. Again, this octanol pesticide travels through the air. I know it doesn't particularly, I'm not clear how much of it leaches, but I can't imagine that, pardon that again, I can't imagine that when it rains hard that a plywood box serves any kind of protection for pesticide pellet inside these boxes. They do travel in the air. We don't know how far they travel. A warm summer day wafting across Wingasheet Beach is, I'm not trying to be overly concerning here, but we don't know is what I'm saying. We just don't know. So these things are harmful, and our environments should not be continually abused by these things. So I'm sorry, I went off a little bit on that, but our urban spaces are dwindling. Our landings and our urban open spaces are just going day by day. So I appreciate your work and help on trying to just identify those, protect those, and make it possible for the residents here to utilize things that are healthy and good for us and our environment. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Patty.
Thank you, Patty. Well, we're doing really well. It's 6:29. And at this point, I do not see any other hands raised. Oh, I do see Jeff Brown. So if you'd like to just identify yourself and your address and then give us some feedback.
Sure, Jeff Brown, Essex Ave. I just had a question. I've taken a look at some of the grants that are on the tail end of this plan that the city will be eligible for. And what I'm finding is sort of a common denominator that the city will lose local control if they accept one of these grants. And an example is the Land Wildlife Conservation Fund, where you would need National Park Service authorization surrounding uses of the land where that grant would be applied. So that's just one. A lot of them seem to have that same theme. And I'm wondering what the committee's thoughts are when it comes to the city losing local control in this manner.
I can answer that if you would like. Sure.
Thanks, Adrian.
Yeah, no problem. So, so for the city of Gloucester to have an active open space and recreation plan, it opens up opportunities to apply for some grants through the Division of Conservation Services, and also the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs will ask if the city has an active open space and recreational plan for certain of their grant programs. And also, of course, if the matter is included in the open space and recreation plan. So that is why the scope of goals and objectives aims to be as broad as possible, so that we're always able to point back to it, because the lifespan of this plan is really significant compared to some other planning efforts that can take place and be updated every 3 to 5 years. So when the city accepts a grant or even considers applying for a grant, there is always a series of performance standards that need to be met. And so in the first place, to be an applicant, the city has to qualify under certain terms, regardless of what the grant is. In some cases, you actually can't apply for the grant if you don't have an active and approved open space and recreation plan, or if the property is not already conserved in some way or has some restriction on the use. So that is kind of the first round of qualifying eligibility and applying for any grant. And so that can take a lot of things right off the top for us in some cases when we're looking at ways that we could potentially improve our open space and recreation areas. Now, moving on from that, when we do get ourselves into a grant program, there's a good historical example where a previous individual who worked for the planning division of the city of Gloucester no longer does, but had applied for a grant program that was going to result in some really nice improvements at Stage Fort Park. But because of that, the program manager that the city was working with had communicated to that person that it was going to require a change in the parking standards in the parking lots at Stage Fort Park, which is to say that they would have to combine the price of parking for both residents and non-residents and set it at a certain rate, so they could not differentiate and make it less expensive. For example, for residents to park at Stage Fort Park, everyone would have to say, pay the same price if they had accepted the grant. And that was a non-starter. Even inside of the city, it was really understood that even attempting to try to pursue a funding opportunity that was going to require a change, which would standardize the opportunity of access for both residents and non-residents to a public land, ultimately was decided that it was simply not going to be successful. And so the opportunity was abandoned. So I think there is an important piece in here in understanding that, the city has really limited resources in terms of staff people who are able to write grant applications, apply for grants, and execute along with the support of consulting teams, both through the Regional Planning Commission, but also with private consultants for what we are really able to do in any given grant cycle year. So, when you're facing that reality as a person on staff, you really want to try to get into programming that you're going to be able to successfully execute. And so for us, we know very clearly inside of the city, and that's not just in the planning division, it's also in the DPW and in the health department and other departments that require and depend upon our ability to move forward through grant programming, that we keep in mind things that we know that the residents and the electorate of the city simply do not support. And so it's expressed here in the plan that the priority, of course, is to consider Gloucester residents first when we're thinking about open space and recreation improvement and planning opportunities. And that plays out even in our thought process of, there are 3 members of the planning division. Between the 3 of us, if we were to sit down for an afternoon, we could come up with probably 150 different potential grant programs that we could apply for in any given cycle. We have the bandwidth to go after about 10 of them. None of them are going to be programs that are going to result in any kind of resistance from the city because we don't have, extra time to waste on things like that. And then on the opposite side of that, anytime there is one of these efforts, there is an accept and expend through City Council Budget and Finance Subcommittee exercise, wherein the city has to actually accept the grant funds from wherever the location is. If it did get that far and there was in some way, some kind of plan in place that would require, for example, a change in access or a change in ownership or a change in management. And that goes before City Council, and those are your elected officials. And you have the opportunity during those subcommittee meetings to speak on your objection. So there is a totally separate public process related to the acceptance of funds and the implication of accepting those funds that is entirely separate from the planning or management process of trying to decide on which programs are the most appropriate ones to follow and which are we're going to have the most success with. So if I were a citizen of Gloucester and I was really concerned about the impact of grant programming and its influence on open space and recreation, access and management and capital improvements, the place that I would follow that is on the City Council agenda, so that I was always working with the City Council, who has the ability to deny those requests to accept and expend appropriations related to grant funds.
Okay, yeah, the sense I'm getting is there isn't a whole lot of concern for residents in the community that want to have to have a say in the matter of what goes on their property, right? So you've got Halibut Point State Park, where they cut some trees down last year, just over a year, I think. And residents or community members, this is on the Rockport side, of course, were up in arms, but they didn't have a say, because it was state run, and they lost control. So, well, thank you for answering my question. I'm pretty much of the mind that, yeah, we're on the cusp of losing local control for the city, and I don't think that's good for residents. I'd like to see more conversation on how we can keep local control of our city. But that's it. Oh, thank you very much for answering my question.
You're welcome, and I encourage you to exercise that in front of City Council. Those are ultimately the final arbitrators of that local control.
Well, it'll be too late because the state will have the plan and the funding sources, and the grants will just come pouring in. Anyway, well, thank you. That's fine.
Thank you, Jeff. Lisa, I see your hand is up again, but I'd like to call on Beth again in the interest of time, but I do want to recognize Beth Brow, and then Lisa, if you have a follow-up question. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Beth Brow at 9 Dodge Street. You can hear me, right? Sorry. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for all the work you guys have been doing. And I apologize, I haven't been to the other meetings. It sounds quite amazing, the ideas of youth recreation programs, and as people have mentioned, possible looking at a Parks and Recreation Department. I live in the Ward 2 or 5 area, which is high density, and we keep growing and might possibly grow even more dense soon. And the limited amounts of parks that we do have in this area, it's really important to protect those for all the people who live here. And as we have lost some, and so I know there's, as you said, there was the inventory parcels of unknown origins, and I don't know, up with Green Street Park, there is, everybody always seemed to think the land behind it was called also Fisherman's Park, which goes over to Ledgemont. And it's a wooded area that people hike all through, and there's quite a bit of wildlife that is in there. But I didn't know if that had been determined, the origins or who owns that. It seems to be the city from when I go to Maps Geo, but I wasn't certain. And could something like that be, and Green Street be conserved as parkland then in perpetuity, or what steps do we need to take to protect these, the remaining parks that we do have in the city. But, and also then where could one see the draft? So thank you. That's
Thank you, Beth. We appreciate that. So I'm not sure I know exactly the parcels that you're talking about, but I will say we did talk a lot about this in the plan, goals and objectives development. One of the goals and something that I talk a lot about coming from the view of the Conservation Office is the need to permanently protect Gloucester's public lands. To me, that is the top objective. If I were to advocate for one, I realize, capital efforts on equipment and facilities are really important in a lot of different ways, and access and other things out there. But it all really, in my mind, begins with the permanent protection of your land. When we were talking about that, one of the objectives was, first of all, to figure out what we already do have in conservation, and how the Conservation Commission can better participate in the management and protection of lands that are held in care, custody, and control of the Conservation Commission, and then also what is not. And in the process of trying to prioritize, if we were to, for example, try to bring in a title attorney and do some background research and get those parcels conserved in perpetuity in some way, which ones would we try to do first? Because there are many, many to consider. So I strongly recommend you stay involved and stay online with this conversation, and continue to advocate, especially for the inner city and highly densely populated areas, open spaces. That does come up a couple of times when we're talking about development of pocket parks and the opportunity to enhance smaller green spaces in our downtown area. And then also under the umbrella of Objective 1, which is largely to conserve first.
okay. So would that mean like to contact the Open Parks Committee, or go to the Conservation Committee? Which one would one kind of process go through?
Also, hold on, I want to look here. We have, we have 26 attendees. We still have a couple of hands up. So at the very end of this, we're going to talk a little bit about next steps. And for now, we don't have the ability to really act on our action steps until we have released the entire draft plan, which you did ask for the opportunity to review. We have had many, many requests for the entire thing. The Open Space and Recreation Committee has reviewed it section by section, and what we're presenting to you now is really the flesh of the document. But you will be able to see the entire thing from beginning to end, beginning on May 12th for public comment period, which will be open from May 12th to June 2nd. And in that public comment period, we strongly recommend everybody here and everybody who reviews and watches this later to draft their responses in writing, ideally in the form of a memo. They're very easy to include as an appendix or an addendum to the Open Space and Recreation Plan. So your thoughts can be fully incorporated into the plan itself. And also through the survey work that we're going to be doing after this, where we're asking you to prioritize objectives and action items. When the plan is in place, please do come to Open Space and Recreation Committees and encourage the committee to prioritize advocating for the conservation objectives.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate everybody's hard work. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Beth. Oh, somebody had their hand raised and it came down, but Lisa, do you want to have a quick follow-up?
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I would appreciate some addressment of hunting as a passive recreation activity on our public lands, because it does happen and it hasn't come up in any plan. Secondly, you talked earlier about partnerships, and Ms. Lennon talked about partnerships with the North Shore Task Force communities. And one thing that's really important is the land that we share with Rockport, with Essex, with Manchester, with Ipswich. I'd like to see some kind of dialogue or communication or collaboration with our surrounding communities, because we share many trails. We've got like the rail trail is huge, which I use, that passes many communities. We've got the Bay Circuit Trail, we've got our Cape Ann Trail Stewards, and these all connect. And I think it's important that we're part of that. So I would like to see that in the plan and how we fit into that larger system. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I think we're getting into second comments, and it is 6:46, but I do want to say, Robert Myers, if you want to have a quick follow-up.
Thank you very much. It's not safe, in my opinion, to bike along the roads around Cape Ann. So I would like to emphasize that when you think about support for bicycling, you don't assume that because we have roads, we have biking. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Great. So I think we're going to wrap it up. I want to say thank you for those people that are here in attendance, and also those people who chose to speak up. Adrian, do you want to talk about next steps?
Sure. Would you formally close the public comment period for me?
Yes, I am formally closing the public comment period at this time, 6:47 p.m. Is that what
That's great. Kristen, do you mind sharing your screen again, and just so we'll go through those last couple of slides?
Okay, so in terms of next steps, we'll be publishing a survey, like Adrian mentioned, where we'll ask you to prioritize objectives and action items from the draft action plan, and that will be open from May 4th to the 10th. A recording of tonight's forum will also be posted on the city website, along with the slides presented on tonight. So those who weren't able to join us can reference that material, hear all the public comments that were brought up, and also take those into consideration as they're prioritizing those objectives. And on May 11th, the committee will meet again to review a full draft of the plan. And then the plan itself, the draft plan itself will be released on the 12th for public comment. And at the same time, the plan will be submitted to the city to gather a letter to allow for the planning board to review the document and to request letters of support, which are required with the final submission of the plan to DCS. We'll also be submitting the draft plan to DCS for initial review. I've done this a few times with other communities, and usually once the draft plan is submitted to DCS, they provide comments that's sent back to the committee to review, make adjustments, and but at that time, they usually will conditionally approve the draft plan, which immediately makes the city eligible to apply for some of those grant opportunities. And once the final comments are addressed from the draft submission and resubmitted to DCS, the city receives final approval and you will have an official OSRP that will hopefully be updated in the next 7 years.
That's great. Thank you so much for that, Courtney. We appreciate it. And I want to just take a moment to say thank you to Mark Rassicott, to Courtney Lewis, and to Kristen Brandt for being here again tonight, to Gemma Wilkins and Greg Catamatori with the city for being here with me, and to the Open Space and Recreation Committee. There is only one item remaining on the agenda, that is to move to adjourn.
One more thing, sorry.
Okay.
I forgot to mention this in the wrap up. Anyone who registered for tonight's meeting will receive an email once that survey is ready and available. So don't worry about missing out on that. You will find that notice in your inbox.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. So members of the committee.
I would like, does anyone have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Move.
I heard too many. So who is that? Looked like, I don't even know. Liam. And then seconded by Richard. And all in favor?
Oh, you have to do a roll call.
Oh, I have to do a roll call. Thank you. So I'm just going in no particular order around my screen. Member Morris,
Yes.
Member Quaitman,
Yes.
Member Anastasia Murphy,
Yes.
Member Sargent,
Yes.
Member Poulin,
Yes.
and I believe Noel Mann came off the call. And Member Wakeman says yes. The motion passes and this meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for your presence and attention to this very important and exciting step in our process. So stay tuned and I look forward to our next meeting.
Thank you, Chairwoman Wakeman. Thank you, everyone, again. Have a great night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Night.